She whispered, "I'm ready tonight," and he let his heart break the rules. If you believe that sometimes life surprises us with people who change everything we thought we knew about love and kindness, make sure to stay until the end. This story will remind you that the most beautiful souls are often the ones we fail to see at first glance. Now, let us return to our main character. Under the soft gold of a late autumn afternoon, the city moved with its usual rhythm horns, conversations, footsteps over the wet pavement. Inside a glass building that overlooked the skyline, a man stood behind his desk, surrounded by the quiet hum of control. His name was Ethan Ward. Every minute of his life was accounted for, every emotion filtered through logic. He had built his fortune by trusting numbers, not people. That afternoon, the boardroom was full of tension. A delayed community project had put his company under public scrutiny. Somewhere within that chaos was the woman he was about to judge too quickly. Her name was Clara Hayes, a quiet contractor who had recently taken over the project after her mentor's illness. She was late, understated, and by every visible measure, unimpressive to the eyes of a man like Ethan. When she finally entered the room, the sound of her soft footsteps was almost drowned by the clicking pens and murmuring executives. Her coat was slightly worn, her notebook filled with hand sketches rather than printed slides. To Ethan, she seemed unprepared, but what he could not see yet was the way she carried herself with calm confidence, like someone who had survived storms that numbers could never measure. As she spoke, her voice was low and deliberate, every word shaped by purpose. She did not try to impress him with business language. Instead, she talked about people, the workers who had not been paid, the local families waiting for the project to finish, the children who watched the construction site every day like it was a promise waiting to be kept. Ethan crossed his arms, impatient. "We are not here to discuss feelings," he said. "We are here to deliver results." Clara looked at him, not offended but steady. "Results without meaning do not last," she replied simply. There was no defiance in her tone, just quiet truth. The room fell silent for a moment. Even the assistant at the back looked up, sensing something different. But Ethan turned away, hiding the faint trace of unease behind a professional mask. He dismissed the meeting early, convinced she was another idealist who would slow him down. Later that evening, as the city lights flickered on, Ethan saw her again in the lobby. She was helping the janitor lift a box of supplies, her sleeves rolled up, her smile easy and genuine. The gesture was small, but it unsettled him more than her words had. People like him did not have time to notice kindness, yet somehow he did. He left without saying a word, but something about her lingered. Maybe it was the sincerity that felt out of place in his world of polished perfection. Maybe it was how she made decency look effortless. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain, and for the first time in years, Ethan found himself wondering if he had misunderstood what strength truly meant. That night, as he drove home through the glittering streets, her voice replayed in his mind. Results without meaning do not last. He did not know why it stayed with him. All he knew was that it did. Tomorrow, their paths would cross again under circumstances neither of them could predict. And the man who thought he knew every rule of life was about to discover that some hearts are meant to break the script. That night, as he drove home through the glittering streets, her voice replayed in his mind. Results without meaning do not last. The words echoed with quiet persistence, unsettling him more than any business failure ever could. Over the next few days, Ethan tried to push the thought aside. He buried himself in meetings, contracts, and phone calls. Yet, everywhere he turned, Clara's presence seemed to linger, subtle but undeniable. The way she treated people, the way she spoke to every worker with respect instead of authority. He began to notice how the atmosphere shifted whenever she entered a room. One afternoon, he visited the project site unannounced. The air was thick with dust and the rhythmic clatter of tools. Clara was there, kneeling beside a worker's child, helping her draw on a piece of scrap wood. Her hair had escaped its tie, and a faint streak of dirt ran along her cheek. When she looked up and saw him, she smiled, not the polite kind reserved for superiors, but a smile that reached her eyes. Ethan froze for a second before regaining his composure. "I thought you might be too busy to be here," he said, his tone more defensive than intended. Clara wiped her hands and stood. "I am busy," she replied lightly, "but not too busy to remind people why this matters." He followed her as she moved around the site, checking progress, encouraging the workers. She listened more than she spoke, but when she did, her words carried quiet authority. Ethan realized how much trust she had earned without demanding it. As the sun dipped low, painting the site in amber light, she stopped beside him. "You know," she said softly, "people do their best work when they feel seen." He looked at her then, really looked at her. For the first time, the sharp lines of her simplicity began to make sense. There was strength in her gentleness, power in her restraint. And against all reason, he found himself wanting to know more about her thoughts, her past, the things that made her eyes look both brave and tired at once. That evening, Ethan offered her a ride back into the city. She hesitated but eventually agreed. The car was silent at first, the hum of traffic filling the space between them. Then she asked quietly, "Do you ever stop working, Mr. Ward?" He glanced at her, amused. "Not often." "That is a shame," she said, gazing out the window. "You miss the small miracles that way." The simplicity of her words struck deeper than she knew. For the rest of the drive, he found himself noticing things he had never cared about before: the way streetlights reflected off puddles, the laughter of strangers at a cafe, the easy comfort in her presence beside him. When they reached her stop, she turned to him with that same gentle steadiness. "Thank you for the ride," she said, "and for listening, even if you did not mean to." He watched her walk away, the night wind tugging at her coat. For a man who measured life by profit and precision, it was disarming to realize that a single woman could alter the rhythm of his thoughts. That night, sleep did not come easily. Her voice lingered in his mind like a whisper he could not silence. Somewhere between logic and longing, something inside him began to shift. He did not know it yet, but Clara Hayes had already changed the way Ethan Ward would see the world and the way he would see love. The following morning, the city woke under a pale winter sky. The streets glazed with a thin layer of frost. Ethan arrived at the office early, driven by an unfamiliar restlessness. For years, every decision he made had been grounded in precision and certainty. But now, Clara's words from the night before about seeing people, about small miracles, echoed quietly through his thoughts, refusing to fade. He poured himself a cup of coffee and stared out at the skyline. Somewhere beneath those rooftops, she was already working. She had mentioned that the workers were short on materials, that several deliveries had been delayed. For reasons he could not quite explain, he found himself picking up the phone. 2 hours later, Ethan stepped onto the project site again. The cold air bit at his skin, but the noise of progress filled the space: hammering, laughter, shouts of coordination. Clara was there, her scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, clipboard in hand. She looked surprised to see him. "Mr. Ward," she said, blinking against the sunlight, "you do not usually make morning visits." "I wanted to see the site myself," he replied, his tone careful. "You said there were issues with the supplies." She nodded and led him toward the half-finished building. As they walked, she spoke about each section, explaining how she had restructured the work schedule to avoid delays. Her explanations were simple but efficient. Ethan listened closely, realizing that her instincts matched the kind of precision his best analysts aimed for. But hers came from understanding people, not spreadsheets. When they stopped by the storage area, Clara crouched beside a pile of uneven bricks. "We can only work with what we have," she said. "Sometimes progress means making the imperfects still hold together." Her words struck him in a place that had long been silent. At noon, she invited him to share lunch with the team. It was nothing fancy: sandwiches and coffee brewed in a tin pot, but there was laughter around the small table, the kind that came from genuine connection. Ethan sat quietly, observing the workers as they teased Clara about her paint-stained gloves and how she never ate enough. For once, he felt invisible, and strangely, it was a relief. After lunch, she walked him back to his car. "You are different today," she said gently. "You listened." He looked at her, caught off guard. "Is that what you wanted from me?" She shook her head. "It is not about what I want. It is about what this place needs. Someone who remembers that numbers build walls, but people build homes." Her words stayed with him long after he drove away. That evening, he sat in his office with the lights dimmed, staring at the architectural plans on his desk. For the first time, he noticed how sterile they looked, lines and figures without warmth or life. He thought of Clara kneeling beside that child, of her hands marked by work, and of her quiet belief that decency mattered as much as success. A thought came to him then, something simple yet revolutionary. He picked up his phone and called his assistant. "I want to increase the labor fund for the housing project," he said, "and schedule a press release about our community initiatives." The assistant paused, confused. "Sir, that will reduce profit margins." "I am aware," Ethan replied. "Do it anyway." When he ended the call, a faint smile crossed his face. It felt foreign but right. Somewhere in the midst of figures and forecasts, he had begun to rediscover what it meant to feel human. That night he found himself driving past the project site again. The building stood dark and quiet under the moonlight, but he could see a single figure inside the faint outline of Clara, still working, her lamp glowing softly through the window. For a long moment, he just watched. Something about her steadiness made the chaos inside him quiet. In that stillness, Ethan realized that what drew him to Clara was not her defiance or her difference, it was the way she carried light into places he had forgotten needed it. And without meaning to, he whispered to the empty car, "Maybe I was never ready to see what mattered." The next day, the atmosphere in the company was tense. Rumors had started to circulate about Ethan's sudden decision to divert funds into the housing project. Shareholders questioned his motives, and board members quietly murmured that he had lost his edge. But Ethan no longer felt the same pressure that had once dictated every choice he made. He knew that this decision, while unpopular, was the right one. Still, he could not ignore the growing unease among his partners. He walked into the boardroom that afternoon, his expression calm but firm. The conversation turned heated almost immediately. One of the executives said, "We are not a charity, Ethan. Our job is to increase profit, not emotions." Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady. "And yet, our reputation depends on the trust of the people who build our future. If we forget that, we lose everything that matters." There was silence. No one spoke for several seconds. Then, without waiting for approval, he stood up and left the room. It was the first time in years he had acted from conviction rather than calculation. That evening he returned to the construction site once more. Clara was there, sleeves rolled up, helping a worker lift a plank. When she noticed him, she smiled soft, unassuming, as if she had been expecting him. "You look tired," she said. He laughed quietly. "I think I just remembered what it means to fight for something that feels right." Clara nodded and motioned for him to follow her. They climbed to the top floor of the unfinished building, where the view opened wide to the city lights. The cold wind carried the scent of concrete and hope. She stood beside him, looking out into the night. "Do you know why I stay here so late?" she asked. He turned toward her. "Because you do not like unfinished stories?" She smiled. "Because when everyone leaves, I can finally see the world as it could be. For a moment, it feels possible that kindness can be built into walls." Her words disarmed him. Ethan watched her face, illuminated by the soft glow of the work lamp, and realized how rarely he had met someone who spoke without trying to impress. There was no pretense in her, no ambition disguised as virtue, just sincerity. They stood there in silence for a long time, listening to the hum of the city below. Finally, Clara spoke again. "You changed something today, did you not?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, and I think it scared everyone, including myself." She looked at him with gentle certainty. "Change always does, but the right kind of fear means you are still alive." Ethan did not respond, but the truth in her words reached him deeply. For years, he had measured success in numbers, contracts, and control. Now, for the first time, success felt like something invisible, a quiet alignment between what he built and what he believed. As the night deepened, Clara handed him a small paper cup of coffee. "To small victories," she said softly. He took it, smiling faintly. To small victories. The simple exchange felt more meaningful than any deal he had ever closed. When he finally returned home, the house felt colder than usual. The silence pressed against him, heavy and unfamiliar. He walked through the wide, empty rooms, his footsteps echoing against the marble floors. For the first time, he wondered whether his success had cost him something far greater than comfort. He looked out the window, toward the distant glow of the site where Clara still worked, and thought about the people she had chosen to fight for those unseen lives she quietly protected. In that quiet moment, Ethan realized that the woman he had once underestimated was teaching him something no mentor or market could, that dignity was not measured by fortune, and that compassion could be the most radical form of strength. And as the city drifted into sleep, he whispered to himself the same words Clara had once said to the child, words that now belonged to him as well. "You are seen." The following week brought an unexpected storm, both in the sky and in Ethan's life. Heavy rain poured over the city, washing dust from the streets but also exposing the cracks in everything that had seemed solid. News outlets had picked up the story of his decision to increase the labor fund, twisting it into speculation about hidden motives and personal ties to the project manager, Clara. By noon, his phone was full of messages from investors demanding explanations. Ethan sat behind his desk, scrolling through the flood of accusations, favoritism, emotional bias, unprofessional behavior. Each word felt like a blow to the steady identity he had built over the years. Yet for some reason he could not feel anger. Instead, there was a quiet sadness, a recognition that the world often misunderstood sincerity as weakness. He picked up his jacket and left the office without telling anyone. The rain had turned into a cold drizzle when he reached the site. Most of the workers had gone home, and the scaffolding shimmered under the wet light. Clara was still there, standing under a half-broken awning, checking a set of plans to protect them from the rain. When she saw him, her expression softened, but she did not ask why he was there. Instead, she handed him a towel. "You should not be out in this weather." He took it and smiled faintly. "Neither should you." She looked back at the structure, her hair damp and loose from the rain. "If I leave now, the cement mix will set wrong. Tomorrow we would have to start again." There was something quietly heroic in her determination. Without thinking, Ethan stepped closer and held the tarp over the papers she was protecting. For a few moments they worked together in silence, the rain drumming steadily above them. Finally, Clara spoke. "I heard what they said about you." Ethan looked down, his voice low. "It does not matter. They see what they want to see." "It matters," she said softly, "because it hurts to be judged for doing something right. But you stood by your choice. That makes you stronger than they know." "Outweigh." He met her gaze, rain catching in his hair. "You make it sound easier than it is." She smiled gently. "It is never easy, but that is what makes it real." Her words lingered in the cold air between them. For a brief second, everything else, the rumors, the board meetings, the noise fell away. There was only the sound of rain and the quiet understanding of two people who had both been misunderstood by the world, yet chose not to harden because of it. When the rain finally eased, Clara folded the damp blueprints and said, "Come inside. There is a small fire in the break room. It is not much, but it is warm." They sat on two old chairs near the flickering light. Steam rose from the kettle she had placed on a small stove. The warmth of the moment felt fragile but real. Ethan glanced at her hands, calloused and marked by work, yet graceful in the way they moved. "You could have chosen an easier life," he said quietly. Clara looked into the fire, her eyes thoughtful. "Maybe, but I wanted a meaningful one. My mother used to say that beauty fades, but kindness leaves traces that never wash away. I want to leave something that lasts longer than my name." Her words reached a part of him he had long kept locked. He realized then that Clara's quiet courage came not from defiance, but from love, the kind that builds, heals, and forgives. As the rain subsided outside, Ethan felt a shift inside him. It was not romance, not yet, but something deeper: respect, admiration, and an ache for all the years he had spent chasing everything except what mattered most. And in that stillness, while the storm faded into silence, Ethan understood that his rules were breaking not because of her, but because of who he was becoming beside her. The following morning, the sun broke through the gray clouds, painting streaks of gold across the skyline. For Ethan, it should have been an ordinary day, yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. His thoughts kept returning to the night he spent with Clara at the site, the quiet firelight, and the way she spoke about meaning, as if it were something that could be built, one brick at a time. At the company headquarters, the storm of criticism had not calmed. News outlets were running another story, this time with photographs of Ethan at the construction site beside Clara. The headlines implied a personal relationship. Ethan knew that gossip had power, and that power was starting to poison his reputation. He called his public relations manager into the office. "Do not issue a denial," he said. "Do not feed the fire. The truth will speak for itself." The manager hesitated. "Sir, your silence will make it worse." Ethan shook his head. Sometimes silence is not weakness, it is restraint. After the meeting, he drove out to the project once more. The drive had become something like meditation for him, a long stretch of road where he could breathe, think, and let go of the noise. When he arrived, Clara was standing near the main structure, overseeing the final pour of the foundation. Her hands were stained with concrete dust, her hair tied up messily. She looked tired, but peaceful. She turned when she saw him. "You should not be here today. They are watching you." "I know," he said, "but I needed to see this finished." "Good old." She studied his face quietly before replying, "You do not have to keep proving yourself, Ethan. What you did was right. People may not understand now, but they will." He smiled faintly. "And what if they never do?" Clara looked toward the workers as they leveled the wet cement. "Then you will still know you tried to build something good. That is enough." Her words carried a calm certainty that steadied him. They walked along the edge of the site together, the hum of machinery fading into the background. At one point, she stopped and pointed to the far side of the lot, where the sun touched the unfinished walls. "Do you see that light? It always falls there first in the morning. I like to think it means something." Ethan followed her gaze. Maybe it means this place has hope. She nodded, smiling softly. Yes, hope has to start somewhere. So they stood there for a long moment, both watching the sunlight spread across the concrete. There was no need for grand gestures or heavy words. The quiet itself was enough, a shared understanding between two people who had begun to see the world differently because of each other. Later that afternoon, Clara received a message from the local shelter she often volunteered for. The old roof had collapsed under the rain, and they were desperate for help. Without hesitation, she told Ethan about it. "Can I borrow some of your workers for a day?" she asked. "Borrow them?" he replied. "I will come with them." That evening, Ethan found himself standing on the shelter's muddy ground beside Clara and a group of volunteers. The work was rough and unglamorous, but no one complained. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he saw something he had never noticed before: the way ordinary people, with no wealth or influence, could build resilience out of almost nothing. When the job was done, Clara sat on the steps, wiping sweat from her brow. "You did not have to be here," she said. Ethan sat beside her. "I think I did." For a while, they just sat there in silence, watching the first stars appear. The world around them was still imperfect, full of misunderstandings and noise, but in that small corner, there was peace. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt like he belonged not to a company or a title, but to something far simpler, something real. The next few days passed quietly, but tension brewed beneath the calm. The construction site continued to grow, standing as a testament to persistence and faith. Yet the world outside remained relentless. Gossip spread faster than the truth, and soon, Clara became the new target. Anonymous articles began questioning her integrity, implying that her position and progress were the result of Ethan's influence, not her own merit. When she arrived at the site one morning, several workers fell silent. Their usual warmth had cooled. She greeted them as always, but their eyes no longer met hers. The air felt heavier, filled with unspoken judgment. Still, she worked. She took measurements, checked supplies, and stayed later than everyone else, determined to let her actions speak louder than the rumors. That evening, as the sky dimmed into shades of violet, Ethan appeared. His face showed exhaustion, but also anger barely contained. "I saw what they are saying about you," he said, his voice firm. Clara looked up from her clipboard. "You cannot fight every false word, Ethan. The more we try, the more we feed them." He stepped closer. "They are trying to destroy what you have built. I cannot stand by and let that happen." She met his eyes calmly. "Then do not fight for me. Just keep believing in the work. That is all the proof I need." Her steadiness disarmed him once again. For a moment, he wanted to tell her everything, how her presence had shifted his world, how he admired her quiet strength, but he stopped himself. It was not the right time. What she needed was protection, not confession. The following day, Ethan arranged a surprise visit from a local journalist he trusted, someone who valued truth over spectacle. Without warning Clara, he brought the journalist to the site, hoping to let her witness the reality of Clara's work. When the journalist approached, Clara was kneeling beside an elderly volunteer, showing him how to properly mix the cement for the foundation. Her sleeves were rolled, her hands gray with dust, her hair messy from the wind. She was laughing freely, without any awareness of being watched. "This," Ethan said quietly to the journalist, "is the woman they say uses people for gain." The journalist observed for hours, documenting the work and the stories of the volunteers. By the end of the day, the truth spoke for itself. A week later, the article was published. The tone was honest, compassionate, and clear. It exposed the false rumors and highlighted Clara's contributions not only to the project, but to the people behind it. The headline read, "The Woman Who Builds More Than Walls." When Clara read it, she looked up at Ethan with quiet disbelief. "You did this, did you not?" He hesitated. "I only wanted people to see what I already knew." She shook her head softly. "Thank you. But you did not need to prove my worth. You only needed to trust that I would endure." He smiled faintly. "I did trust you. I just needed the world to catch up." The tension between them softened into something deeper, unspoken yet undeniable. As the evening light faded, they stood side by side, watching the workers finish for the day. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something he had almost forgotten: peace. Not the peace of control or victory, but the peace that comes from standing next to someone who brings light into dark places without ever asking for credit. And as the wind carried the sound of laughter and tools clinking into the distance, Ethan realized that this project was no longer just a building. It was a mirror reflecting everything he had begun to rediscover: humanity, hope, and the quiet courage of one woman who refused to give up on either. The week after the article was published, the atmosphere at the project site changed completely. The same workers who once doubted Clara now greeted her with respect. Even the investors began to soften their stance as positive press spread across social media. For the first time in months, hope seemed to breathe within the walls that were still being built. Ethan noticed the difference in her. Clara laughed more often now, but not out of pride, rather from relief. She no longer carried the quiet weight of defending herself. Instead, she poured her energy into improving the living conditions of the construction workers, organizing better meals and safety protocols. Her kindness was practical, never performative, and everyone could feel the sincerity behind her actions. One late afternoon, Ethan arrived to find her teaching one of the younger workers how to read a blueprint. The way she explained things with patience, humor, and warmth made him realize how rare it was to see leadership rooted in empathy. He stood quietly, watching her, until she looked up and caught him smiling. "You are staring," she said with a playful tone. "I was learning," he replied. "Apparently, you teach better than most of my engineers." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "That is because I teach with mistakes included. People trust you more when they see you are human." He nodded, feeling the truth in her words. For years, he had lived behind a wall of perfection, never allowing anyone to see the cracks. Yet somehow, this woman made him believe that imperfection was not failure, it was connection. As the sun began to set, the workers finished for the day and left in small groups, waving goodbye to Clara. She stood beside Ethan, both of them watching the sky burn into shades of orange and pink. "Do you ever wonder," she asked quietly, "what it would have been like if you had chosen a different life?" Ethan thought for a moment. "I used to think I had everything I wanted. Now I am not so sure what that means anymore." Clara smiled gently. "Maybe that is the beginning of something better." He turned toward her. "And what about you? If you could start again?" Her expression softened. "I would still build, but maybe I would not wait so long to believe I deserved peace." There was something in her tone that carried both strength and exhaustion. Ethan felt an urge to reach out, to tell her she was not alone, but he stayed silent. The timing had to be right. That evening, they shared dinner with the workers by the fire. Music played from a small speaker, laughter echoing under the open night sky. It was simple, unpolished, and deeply human, the kind of moment that reminded Ethan why he had made the choices that risked his reputation. As the night grew colder, Clara offered him a cup of warm tea. "You are still thinking," she said, her voice quiet. "I am," he admitted, "about what it means to deserve peace." "Tal." She looked at him for a long moment before replying, "It means forgiving yourself for the years you did not know better." Her words sank deep. He realized then that she was not just speaking about herself. Later, when the fire burned low and most of the workers had left, Ethan and Clara remained, sitting in silence beneath the stars. The city lights shimmered in the distance, but here, surrounded by the half-finished walls they had built together, everything felt still. In that quiet moment, Ethan turned to her and said softly, "You were right. Hope does start somewhere." She smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the glow of the dying fire. "And sometimes," she whispered, "it starts in people who never expected to find it." For a while, neither of them spoke. The night carried a peace that words could not describe, an unspoken truth between two souls who had learned, through struggle and grace, that healing often begins where judgment ends. The following weeks brought both completion and uncertainty. The project neared its final phase, the walls standing tall, the roofs taking shape, and the laughter of the workers echoing through the open spaces. What had begun as a plan on paper was now becoming a living, breathing testament to collaboration and trust. Yet for Ethan and Clara, something unspoken lingered between them, an emotional blueprint they had drawn but never confessed to following. One afternoon, a storm rolled across the city. Rain poured over the construction site, halting the work. Clara stayed behind to check on the storage area, worried about the equipment. When Ethan arrived, drenched and breathless, he found her struggling to move heavy materials out of the rain. Without a word, he joined her, their hands brushing briefly. They worked side by side, soaked to the skin, until the last tarp was secured. When it was over, they stood together under the half-built roof, the sound of rain surrounding them. Clara looked at him, her eyes shimmering under the dim light. "You did not have to come," she said softly. "I did," he replied simply. "You should not face storms alone." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain softened, the air thick with the weight of everything left unsaid. Then, almost instinctively, Ethan reached out, his hand finding hers. "Clara," he began, voice low, "I have tried to stay professional, to draw lines, to keep things right, but somewhere along the way, I stopped knowing where right ended, and you began." Her breath caught. "Ethan," he stepped closer, his tone steady but tender. "You changed how I see everything. The project, the people, myself. You made me remember that building something real does not always mean keeping it under control." Clara's gaze softened, conflicted, yet sincere. "We both know this could complicate everything." "I know," he said, "but not saying it feels worse." The silence that followed was fragile, yet full of understanding. She squeezed his hand gently, her eyes glistening. "Then let us finish what we started the right way. Whatever comes after, we will face it when it arrives." Ethan nodded, respect and affection intertwined in his expression. They stood together, not as superior and subordinate, not as benefactor and recipient, but as two people who had learned to build beyond walls towards something human, uncertain, but deeply true. When the project officially completed a month later, a small ceremony was held. The workers celebrated, the community gathered, and the first families prepared to move in. Clara gave a brief speech, her voice steady yet emotional. She thanked the team, the sponsors, and the man who had believed in her when others did not. She did not name Ethan, but everyone understood. As the crowd dispersed, Ethan found her standing alone near the finished building, gazing at it with quiet pride. "It is beautiful," he said. "So is what we went through to make it," she replied. He smiled faintly. "What will you do next?" She turned toward him. "Keep building, maybe not just houses this time. You—" Ethan understood the meaning behind her words. He nodded slowly, his eyes soft. "Then I hope whatever you build next, you let yourself live inside it too." They stood together as the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting long golden light over the new homes. No promises were spoken, yet something lasting had already begun, an understanding that love, like architecture, is not about perfection, but about endurance, courage, and faith in what can stand the test of time.